Hi, I'm Jay, and this is Jay's Truth Serum. The video that you're about to watch is part of what I call mental mechanics. That is what felt like the mental math of my journey to mental health. It's the information, the questions, the patterns, the processes that I observed that helped get me to a place of mental health. When I was misreading feelings, when I was not understanding where the thoughts and behaviors that weren't serving me were coming from. These things help click things into place to get me to a place of peace, calm, self-confidence, and control. It helped me, and I hope that it helps you. Thank you for watching. Hi, and welcome back to Truth Serum. This video is about a really important topic that I observed on my journey to mental health. It's a tool that helped give me answers as to why I was feeling things that I didn't like over and over again, why I was having thoughts that would stop me from living my life, why I was having behaviors that didn't serve me. And that tool is patterns. Why patterns? Well, because we cycle through patterns in our everyday life, all day, every day. Patterns consist of very important parts. I started observing there's needs, there's feelings, there's thoughts, there's behaviors. Those things aren't random. They're connected through patterns. And when I started observing my patterns, I started getting answers. I used to cycle through feelings of stress, anxiety, overwhelm without rhyme or reason, thinking that there was no explanation. I couldn't find why these things kept coming back, no matter how much I worked through them, no matter how much I distracted, no matter how much I worked out, no matter how much I talked about it or meditated, etc., etc. These things just kept coming back to bog me down, and it was really frustrating. And then I started observing my patterns, and I started getting answers as to why the feelings were happening, as to why the thoughts were coming up that kept holding me back, as to why these behaviors were happening, why I couldn't stop. Patterns gave me tangible solutions to work on, tangible information that I could grasp, that I could start changing, that I could start practicing, and that's why I'm sharing about patterns here with you today. So let's get started. So when I first started on this journey to resolving the feelings, thoughts, behaviors that bogged me down in life, I was asking myself a lot of questions. I was trying to get down to the bottom of where do these things come from? Why do these feelings keep coming back? Why do these thoughts, how are these thoughts produced? I don't like these thoughts. I'm not choosing these thoughts. Why can't I control this? Why do they keep cycling back? Is there more behind these behaviors that are affecting me? Is there a way for me to prevent them? There should be a way that I can take action, that I can take control of this. And so I started asking myself a whole lot of questions. I was breaking things down into these parts. Okay, feelings, thoughts, behaviors. What produces these feelings, thoughts, behaviors? And so I thought about, well, what if I start focusing on the things that help, where I have positive feelings, thoughts, behaviors? What if I start focusing on those events, on those moments? And maybe those will help give me answers as to what is producing these thoughts, these feelings, these behaviors that I don't like. What if these good moments can help give me answers as to how to prevent these, as to what's causing these, how to prevent these, what I can do about them. And what I started doing, I started focusing on my physiological needs, right? The things that we carry out, we do so well every day for our survival. And I started understanding, well, when I carry out my physiological needs, there's similar parts, right? There's feelings involved, there's thoughts, there's actions. We almost don't perceive them because they are so efficient. We're so good at them. We're so automatic when it comes to our physiological needs. So I started observing these physiological needs, and I started getting a lot of answers. I started seeing that if you think about it, you are not born with the thought that tells you this is a hunger pang, you have to eat. There's a need for food. There's a need for fuel. There's a need for water. We're not born with those thoughts, right? And so the more I broke down our physiological needs for myself, the more I started questioning, well, where does this come from? How is this thought that helps me identify my physiological need, how is that produced? How do I know that I need to eat? And so realistically, in our childhood, babies cry to have all their basic needs met. They are born with a need and a feeling. They are not born with that thought that lets them know this is hunger. Much less are they able to carry it out for themselves. They cry, their parents fulfill that need over and over and over, immediately, consistently, repeatedly throughout our childhoods. That's what happens. Those exchanges result in information that our mind registers, that helps us associate these things, that helps us be informed, so that as adults, we have that automatic, I'm hungry, let me carry this act out. And when I started understanding that we're so well informed and that's why we can fulfill our physiological needs, I started questioning, well, wait a minute, maybe these other symptoms are coming up because there's information missing. Maybe there's information that I'm missing, maybe there's something missing in this equation. And sure enough, I started understanding, well, I don't just have basic physiological needs, I have basic emotional needs. The more I started observing these physiological patterns, the more clear it became that all my life, the reason I had these symptoms that kept coming up, anxiety, depression, stress, overwhelm, these thoughts that did not serve me, that weren't healthy for me, that were holding me back, and these behaviors that didn't serve me, the reason these were coming up is because I had only been fulfilling my physiological needs all my life. And I had this other basic needs that I didn't even know about, wasn't fulfilling. And that was kind of this aha moment where, okay, this makes sense. I have basic physiological and emotional needs. I have only been fulfilling the physiological needs. That is why I've been held back in all these ways. Sure, I've been able to live my life, I've been doing stuff, but I have been held back carrying these rocks, not understanding that I have these basic emotional needs that also need to be fulfilled. And I started filling in those parts to that pattern of my emotional needs because it's the same pattern. The same pattern underlies both our physiological and our emotional needs. And I started understanding how to fill in all those parts that I had been missing with regards to my emotional needs when I started observing what happens when I fulfill my physiological needs, what happens when I don't fulfill my physiological needs. And I started sitting with this information and I started understanding it, and it helped give me concrete answers. It gave me something to hold on to, something that I could actually work on, as opposed to being confused about these inexplicable things that kept happening. Now there was an explanation, now there was reasons, and now I could start addressing the feelings, thoughts, behaviors that weren't serving me, so that I can change them and simply fulfill my life without all those things bogging me down constantly. So let's get into those patterns. When I started seeing patterns with regards to my physiological needs, I started identifying these two patterns very consistently. And that is what happens when you fulfill those basic needs and what happens when you don't fulfill those basic needs. And I started identifying those as a fulfillment pattern and as a deficiency pattern, right? If you think about it, when you have a need, a basic need for food or a basic need for water, there is a very specific pattern that comes into play. And this is what I call a fulfillment pattern. There's a need, there's a feeling, there's a thought, and there's a behavior. These things happen on automatic. We're stopping them. We're going slow-mo here to identify these important parts that are just automatic for us for the sake of our mental health. So if you look at the fulfillment pattern, something that I started identifying was, I get this feeling, I get this hunger pang, which signals a need right before it. First, you get hungry, right? Your body starts needing nutrients, starts needing fuel. It sends you a signal, it sends you a feeling of hunger. That hunger gives you a thought. It helps you have to identify that hunger. That thought pops up just automatically. You identify this is hunger, and then you carry out a behavior. You eat. Just like this, on automatic. every single day. You don't perceive that pattern. We don't perceive it because we're so quick. It's so automatic. It's so efficient. We've practiced it so many times. Now we're stopping to slow-mo to understand that pattern. There's a need, there's a feeling, there's a thought, and there's an action or an inaction. In the fulfillment pattern, there's an action. You carry out an action to fulfill that need. And it is the same pattern with regards to every single basic physiological need. When you feel cold, you do the same thing. When you feel thirst, there's a need, there's a feeling, there's a thought, and there's an action. You have the need for water, you feel the feeling of thirst, you identify it almost without thought, and then you carry out an action, you drink water. Those patterns are automatic for us now, but they weren't. Those patterns are fed by information that came from repeated exchanges in our childhood that informed our mind, that our mind registered, and now we receive that information almost like this. It's a synthesis of information. It's an accumulation of information. This is how we learned to identify, hey, this is hunger. Hey, this is the feeling for hunger. What do I have to do? I have to eat. Those pieces are all associations. Those pieces are things that we accumulated from our repeated exchanges with our parents. That fulfillment pattern, that need, feeling, thought, behavior is what helps us function so automatically every day. So before I move on to the next pattern, why is this fulfillment pattern relevant? So we weren't born with those parts, right? I mentioned this before. We were born with the need and the feeling. The thought, the action, those we weren't born with. Those became associated with the need and the feeling, that signal that we were born with that tells us, hey, we're hungry. We weren't born with the rest of the information. It was associated. That thought that tells you, hey, this is hunger, it's a need, you gotta eat. Hey, this is a bowel movement, you gotta head to the restroom. Hey, this is thirst, you need to hydrate. We weren't born with the thought that identifies it, right? Why does that matter? Why does that fulfillment pattern matter? It tells you that with regards to those thoughts that criticize you, that make you feel small, that make you doubt yourself, that make you think things and take you places that you don't want to be, those thoughts, you weren't born with them. You were not born with them. Those thoughts aren't your fault. Those thoughts are information that became associated. Now, I'm not saying that was purposeful. I'm not saying this is not about blaming yourself. This is not about blaming your caregivers. It's not about blaming others. This isn't something that we sit and we think about. This isn't something that we are taught. It's a basic need. And unfortunately, it's something that most of us are lacking as far as I know. So I want to emphasize that fulfillment pattern is significant because it exemplifies the fact that you were not born with those thoughts that bog you down. This changed so much for me because I would blame myself, right? We have these thoughts that are heavy, these thoughts that take you places, these thoughts that you can't get rid of, the overthinking, the ruminating, the inner critic that messes with you, right? Keeps you from opportunities. That thought, when I realized that thought was not mine, I didn't make it, I didn't choose it, it was ingrained in me. It helped me set those thoughts aside. When those thoughts would pop up, it helped me stop them in their tracks because I registered, you're not mine. I don't want you, I never chose you. Those thoughts that hold you back aren't yours. You did not choose them, but you can choose to do something about it. So that's why the fulfillment pattern matters so much. Those thoughts that hold us back. This is how we identify that these thoughts aren't ours and we can do something about it, right? Another reason this fulfillment pattern matters is it tells us that that's similar with regards to our behaviors. These thoughts, they are associations, right? We fulfill our basic physiological needs so well because we accumulated piles upon piles upon piles of information as a result of repeated exchanges with our caregivers over and over, right? We were so well informed, and that's how we carry them so easily and carry them out on automatic every day. And that's information that we were missing with regards to our emotional needs, right? Same thing with our behaviors. Our behaviors are also associations that we learn to carry through. We didn't sit and think, okay, I want to keep this information. This is how I have to act. This is how I need to be. Most of it, realistically, is just associations, right? Those behaviors are fed by thoughts. These thoughts and these behaviors are very much intertwined. And that is how so much of how we function today, day to day, came to be. These thoughts and these behaviors, most of them are formed by piles and piles of information that formed associations, and now they feed into our automacy, our automatic functioning every day. That's important because it helps you remove the blame. It helps you understand that you can change. This is a manual process. It's not automatic like we have the capacity to be. It's manual because we're missing that information. But having the information with regards to the fact that these aren't necessarily things you chose. This is information that was just unconsciously registered, and now you receive it. It tells you you can do something about it. Now, a final note that I want to make on this fulfillment pattern that really helps exemplify the fact that these thoughts we're not born with, that these behaviors we're not born, these are all associations, is it's important to consider that the thoughts that feed into our automatic survival every day with regards to our physiological needs, that I'm hungry, that I'm thirsty, that I need to head to the restroom, this is a bowel movement, those thoughts are complex thoughts. Those thoughts are capsules of a whole bunch of information, little bits and pieces of healthy, relevant information that we received in our childhood, from our caregivers, from our exchanges with our caregivers. We first had to identify, hey, this is a feeling, this is a signal, this is hunger. We weren't born knowing the signal means hunger. We associated that. The same way that we associated, this is food. There's a need for food. Food is fuel. When I get this feeling, I need to eat. All of those bits and pieces are tiny bits and pieces of information that we received over and over and over and over, that relevant, healthy info. And that came to be accumulated, it came to be registered, associated, and it came to be synthesized into a capsule of information that we just receive on automatic as adults, that we can just fulfill as adults. It came to be a capsule that is, I'm hungry. That little I'm hungry contains all these pieces of information that we just know because we've associated it. We know all this information. That little I'm hungry identifier tells us everything because we accumulated these healthy little bits and pieces of information from the piles and piles of information. We're so well informed. That is why we carry out these physiological needs automatically so well, right? Now, it is the same thing with regards to your thoughts and behaviors that do not serve you. The physiological needs were so well informed. The emotional needs, not so. Massive deficit. We generally do not understand. We have emotional needs. We don't know the signal for those emotional needs. We don't know how we're supposed to fulfill those emotional needs. There's a massive deficit with regards to that. There's a whole bunch of unhealthy, incorrect messaging with regards to our emotional needs, which is why they don't get fulfilled, which is why we have these thoughts, which is why we have these behaviors that do not serve us. But also, you might think, well, this thought that I'm getting, I don't remember somebody telling me this thought. I don't remember somebody repeating it. Same thing with those behaviors. I don't remember seeing it. Well, it might be that you just don't remember. But also, it's important to note, it might be that those thoughts are likely capsules of tiny bits and pieces of information that was associated, unhealthy information, because we generally don't know about our emotional needs, right? Humanity we're not educating on this. These are bits and pieces of information that became associated, that formed these negative thoughts, that formed these unhealthy behaviors, right? And now we have to start doing it on manual. right? It tells you the work that you have to do. It gives you a little bit of guidance with regards to why it's happening, but also it's important to understand the little bits and pieces of information, gathering that. That is how, on manual, we start to change these things. The thoughts and the behaviors are driven by so much unhealthy information that was piled and piled up, right? Our mind registered that. It's a huge bank of information. It's very efficient at that. But we now manually have to start understanding these things, these little bits and pieces of information, to start feeding back in these positive pieces of information. But it's also that so that you don't blame yourself, so that you understand that when these thoughts pop up, they're hard to combat because there's so much information that fit into it. And now we have to start rewriting that script. Then I started asking myself about what happens when we don't fulfill those basic needs. What happens when we don't fulfill that need for hunger? What happens when we don't fulfill that need for thirst? And then I started identifying what I call the deficiency pattern. And that is, again, a pattern that is consistent with regards to all of our basic needs. I started identifying that first there's, in this deficiency pattern, there's a need, there's a feeling, there's a thought, and then there's an inaction, which is basically not fulfilling that need, and something that happens because of that. So if we take food as an example again, we have this need that pops up. We need fuel. You get that feeling of hunger. You have the thought identifying that feeling, recognizing that it's hunger, and you have an inaction, right? If you go too long, you don't eat. That is an inaction. That's the same thing with regards to all of our needs. What happens in the deficiency pattern is the need for food, that feeling continues, and you get a secondary symptom. You get hunger. You get a headache, you get a tummy ache, depending on the person, different things might happen. What happens with the deficiency pattern is the original feeling that signals the need continues, but your body is now running out of fuel. It's going to let you know, hey, we got to send a second signal. This person needs to pay attention to this need, that we got to fulfill it. It sends a second symptom. And in the case of hunger, that may be any one of those things. In the case of not drinking water when you're supposed to, you get dehydrated, right? And in the case of not covering up when you are cold, you get hypothermia if you go too far. You get a secondary symptom that pops up when you do not fulfill a basic need, hence the deficiency pattern. Now, I want to stress, this is important because of that secondary feeling, because of that information. We are trying to understand that information so that we can address it in those situations where we don't know how to fulfill our emotional needs. But I call this a deficiency pattern, and that in no way suggests that you have done anything wrong. That's not to say that you are to blame, that there's something for you to fix, that these things in any way define you. That is absolutely not the case. This is about information. This is about understanding. It's not about blaming you. It's not about blaming your parents or your caregivers growing up. This is about understanding so that we can arm ourselves with information so that we can address the things that bog us down in everyday life. Now, why is this deficiency pattern significant? This deficiency pattern is significant because it exemplifies, well, when you have a need and that need is not fulfilled, there is a secondary symptom to alert you, to let you know, hey, there's this thing that's happening that you need to fulfill. Let me send the second signal. That's what your mind does to you. When I understood this deficiency pattern, it helped me understand that the constant anxiety that I was cycling through, the depression that kept holding me back, that kept holding me down, the stress, the overwhelm, these were secondary symptoms. They weren't random. They weren't inexplicable. It seems that way because, well, we lack information as to what they really are. What I started understanding with this deficiency pattern is that secondary symptom that pops up when I don't fulfill a physiological need, that is akin to this anxiety, this stress, this fear, this worry, these things that I don't like. Those feelings aren't enemies. Those feelings are information trying to tell me there is an underlying need that needs to be fulfilled. That give roots to the issue. It helped give me something that I could grasp, that I could hold onto, that I could actually address, so that when those feelings came about, I didn't distract. You don't distract when you have a headache. You don't distract when you get hangry. You eat, right? You don't distract when you're dehydrated. You drink water. When you have this anxiety, this depression, these chronic things that keep coming back to bog you down, what I realized is these are signals, secondary signals. I need to start fulfilling the underlying need so that these signals subside. And it's important because, like with the first pattern, what this does is it gives you solutions, it gives you information, and it also helps you stop blaming yourself. You're not causing these things. You do not cause your depression. Your depression, this anxiety, these things that overwhelm us and bog us down as humans, they affect everybody to some extent. These are things that are happening because we are lacking information. We are lacking healthy messaging. We are lacking healthy information. And when you start to address that, those things start to set aside. It's important that you not blame yourself, that you not feel shame because of these things that keep coming back. We haven't been informed. I wasn't informed. My parents weren't informed. Their parents weren't informed. There was no knowledge of this. That is why this information is so relevant. So where do we go from here? If you consider what we've gathered with regards to our physiological needs, that deficiency pattern, that fulfillment pattern, the whole idea is to be able to live in a fulfillment pattern with regards to our emotional needs, right? I realized I'm living in a deficiency pattern. I am living in this deficiency pattern, and that is why I am having these symptoms that keep coming up. I'm having these feelings I don't like, these thoughts that bog me down, these behaviors that do not serve me. I'm living in deficiency, okay? And it makes sense because we weren't informed on it, yes? And so I started understanding, well, with physiological needs, we have very specific relief. You have a need for water, you have to fill it, you have to hydrate, right? If you have a need for food, you have to eat food. You cannot go shopping and expect your need for water to be fulfilled. You know? You can't go exercise, you can't go sit and watch TV and expect your need for water to be fulfilled. No, you have very specific forms of relief for every specific need. That is the same thing with regards to our emotional needs. Specific needs require specific relief. And so I had been living in this deficiency pattern because I'm going out here, you know, if I feel something I don't like, what I do is I distract and I would work myself to the bone, or I would go shopping, I would eat, I would sit and numb myself on social media. And the thing is, well, those aren't specific emotional relief. Those things are fine and good. Those things can give meaning, right? I would go and be in a relationship and think that would fulfill me. No, because those aren't relief. Those aren't emotional relief. And so those things are good. They give us meaning, but they are not specific relief. That is why, as much as we do those things, as much as we did A, B, C, and D, these things, thoughts, feelings, behaviors came back to bog us down because I was living in a deficiency pattern, not informed by the information that I needed for relief, right? I'm missing, what is this emotional need? What is the signal for that emotional need? What's the emotional relief for that emotional need? And so it's important to understand that what was happening was misassociations. Our physiological needs were filled so consistently with information that we created proper healthy associations. I was living in a deficiency pattern because what I had created was misassociations, right? Your mind is going to feed you information to survive based off of the information that it has. If it never received the information that it needed to help me fulfill my emotional needs, it's going to just suggest the next best thing, right? Food is helpful. Okay, let's go with food. Relationship, let's go with relationship. It was doing its best to help me survive, but I was living in a deficiency pattern because what I had created was misassociations. I was plagued by misassociations. The information that I had with regards to my emotional needs was not healthy information, and I was lacking a whole bunch of information. So what I had was misassociations. I don't like this feeling. Well, let me go burn myself out at work. Let me go burn myself out exercising. Let me go try to be in this relationship. No, those are all misassociations. Those are all fine and good. They give our life good feelings, right? Those are icing on the cake, but they're not emotional relief. My very first tip when it comes to finding your way to that fulfillment pattern with regards to your emotional needs, when it comes to leaving that chronic deficiency pattern behind, the very first tip that I have is practice. You have got to practice. You have got to sit, to observe, to question, to see that fulfillment pattern, to see that deficiency pattern with regards to your physiological needs, to absorb the information that I have shared with you here today. Sit and practice, right? With our physiological needs, they are automatic because we practiced so much in our early years with our caregivers. Tiny bits of information accumulated, stored, and now it's automatic. Healthy pieces of information. Now we've got to practice manually in order for it to one day become automatic. We have to practice that manual process of ingesting those pieces of information, of observing what we are ingesting, of observing what happens when it happens. Practice is everything. The good news is that we have evolved for this. We have evolved to be able to sit, to stop, to feel, to think about what is going on so that we can do exactly this. Rewrite that script. Weed out that unhealthy information, the information that is lacking. Replace it with healthy information, with relevant information, to live in a fulfillment pattern, to live without the deficiency pattern constantly bogging every single one of us down. You were made for this. Give yourself that opportunity. Practice identifying your misassociations. If you're getting that feeling, that anxiety, that stress, that depression, practice identifying it. That's a secondary symptom. Practice identifying it. Say, oh, well, this is anxiety. What's going on around this anxiety? What's happening with this anxiety? What's underlying? What do I need right now? Ask yourself. Have that conversation with yourself. Every time that you get that thought that tells you, hey, you're not enough. You can't do this. You need more. You're not good enough until this or that, or until you're with this person. Or you're ugly, you're dumb, etc., etc. I promise you those are misassociations. Those are misassociations. Stop and observe it. To the extent that you can. Stop and observe it. Note it. This is happening. That very process of just identifying the misassociation, it seems very simple. It seems like nothing, but it is enormous, right? As a baby, that practice with your parents with regards to your physiological needs came in tiny little bits and pieces. Same thing with this. Same thing with emotional needs. When you stop that automatic process of that thought telling you you're not enough, you are stopping an automatic process. And that in and of itself is information. This manual process of stopping, of challenging, of observing, of seeing, of questioning, that process, those tiny little bits and pieces, those little moments are enormous. They are life-changing. Practice identifying the behaviors you don't like. That simple process of stopping and observing, of noting, no matter how brief it might be. You might sit, it might be brief between the moment you get from here to your car. It may be an hour while you're writing things down. It doesn't matter. Every one matters. It all matters. Practice it. See those misassociations. Call them out. Challenge them. It may look very different for very different people. Run with it. Trust yourself. Think about insecurities. You didn't choose your insecurities. Nobody chooses to be insecure. Nobody chooses, yeah, you're dumb. Yeah, no, I don't believe in you. You're not enough. Nobody chooses that. I started asking myself, where did you come from? Where are you coming from? Why do you pop up and make me doubt myself? Did I choose you? And I believe you and it just kept you in my bank of information? No, you did not choose it. Nobody chooses to be insecure. When you start seeing these patterns, you start seeing that those thoughts, those behaviors, those feelings are simply misfed, are misassociations. They are information, unhealthy information that was ingrained, that you registered, and then now plays out, that should never have been there to begin with, that you can begin setting aside so that they do no longer control you, so they no longer stay, so that they no longer live in there, in your head, and they no longer rule your life. I don't care who you are. Everybody has a thing that holds them back. A numbness, maybe you feel something's missing, maybe you feel you need this thing, and when you have this thing, you're going to be happy, and you get that thing, and then you're still not happy, you still need something else. Those are misassociations. When you start discovering that you have emotional needs and basic emotional relief to fulfill it, those things start setting aside. I used to be so insecure about myself that I could not see myself in pictures. I could not hear my own voice. I didn't like it. I cringed because I didn't like myself. Now I can record a video of me. I can see me naked and love me. Seeing the misassociations and the patterns in my life have helped me live the life that I never knew was possible, that I had always wanted. I started seeing answers, and I started to live the life that I should have always lived. And I am being vulnerable here with you today and showing you this information and telling you about me because I believe it's possible for everyone, so that your path is a little easier. I believe in you. Now it's time that you believe in you. Thank you for being here with me today. I know that this video very vaguely mentions emotional needs, and I promise that video is forthcoming. It's important that we sit with this information that I've shared today, that we absorb it, that we practice, that we think about it organically, and we start questioning, and we start sitting with ourselves and making a habit of understanding this information. Thank you for choosing yourself. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. If this video was helpful, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And I will see you next time.